Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of First Service Residential's Ask the Expert series. Today, we'll discuss Building Efficiency 305, also known as BE 305. BE 305 is the City of Miami's initiative to increase energy and water efficiency in large public and private buildings. My name is Frank Lago. I'm a director in the South Florida High Rise Division at First Service, and I will be moderating today's discussion. The following experts are joining me here today. First off, we have Daniel Erickson, Technical Program Manager at First Service Energy, the energy management arm of First Service Residential. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Frank. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to meet with us today.
Glad you're here. Tell us a little bit more, Daniel, about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in energy for 6+ years. I've been part of the First Service Energy for just over a year now. It's been a pretty wonderful year, and I've loved working with all of our team members and communities. I manage the energy management team and data team, in charge of a lot of the data management and compliance.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, we have Chris Normandy, Director of First Service Energy. Chris, can you share with us some of your responsibilities as the Director of First Service Energy?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, Frank, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So as Director of First Service Energy, I am a resource to the properties that are managed by First Service Residential to help them make informed decisions about energy, assets, utilities, basically anything that falls under one of those very large umbrellas. A little bit about my background. I've been with First Service Energy for about 11 years or so. Prior to that, I've worked in various aspects of energy efficiency engineering and helping properties and customers save energy. So that's where I'm coming from for this conversation.
Well, that's great, Chris. Thank you so much. And our last panelist, one of the vice presidents of the High Rise Division at First Service, Kim Penillos.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning. I am one of the 7 vice presidents in the South Florida High Rise Division. I've been with First Service Residential going on 17 years. My portfolio of properties goes from downtown Miami to Pompano Beach, and we're really the operational arm that actually services the properties. I have a team of regional directors that I oversee, and they oversee a team of managers.
Thank you, Kim, and thank all of you for participating. Now, before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout this event, please submit them through the Q&A option on your control panel. Also, a recording of today's session will be available in the resource library of our website in the coming days. In addition, we'll be sharing a resource in our chat, which we developed on energy benchmarking. We encourage you to review it and share it with your fellow board members. Well, let's get started. Chris, can you give us an overview of BE 305?
Sure. Thanks. That's why we're all here today, right? So BE 305 is a ordinance from the City of Miami to encourage properties to benchmark their energy and water consumption. Now, what that means is it encourages properties to upload how much energy they're consuming, how much water they're consuming, and how much they're paying for those commodities. And we'll get into a little bit more of specifics about that shortly, I'm sure. One thing to note is that this isn't a new point. This isn't a new perspective for cities, right? So this has been taken on by dozens of cities throughout the country. New York, Chicago, DC, Philly. It's really throughout much of the country is going with a legislation like this.
Excellent. Thank you for that summary, Chris. Daniel, the next question is for you. can you tell us about which buildings in the city of Miami are going to be impacted by the 305 initiative? And by when must they comply?
You're muted, Daniel.
Great question. And thanks, Chris. So I just announced it all right there. It was a great, I'm done. All right. No, so buildings over 200,000 square feet are going to need to comply. That compliance deadline is June 30th of this year, 2023. There is, in fact, another compliance deadline at the end of the year in October. That is for buildings over 100,000 square feet. And actually, there's a tiered system that is in place. So going into next year in 2024, that limit will go down to 50,000 square feet by October 1st of 2024. Finally, 20,000 by October 1st of 2025. Every year getting a little bit in the lower and including more buildings in that. So with that, a recommission study is required every 5 years after the initial filing. So that'll be happening. When we talk about this, something that I'd like to also mention is this is commercial buildings, residential buildings. We're obviously focused on the residential part of this, but in that, any part of the building, if there is commercial or retail in that building, that's included in the residential part that you have to include the data for. It's data that will be publicly shared. It's anonymized and publicly shared so that they can be benchmarked against other buildings, hence the term benchmark. So then everybody will be able to kind of see how you do in the market and nationwide.
So basically, Daniel, it's properties over 100,000 square feet in the city of Miami, right?
Yes, correct. In the city of Miami.
Kim, just off the top of my head, are there any condo high-rise buildings that you have that are under 100,000 square feet?
I do not have any in the city of Miami that are under 100,000 square feet. So everybody in my portfolio will need to comply.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was curious about there, right? So every condo in Miami, effectively, this applies for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say most buildings in the city of Miami are over 200,000 square feet. There was a lot of great information there, Daniel. So what I'm hearing is June 30th, 2023 as a deadline for buildings that are larger than 200,000 square feet, which we just stated is most of the buildings in the city of Miami. So,
yeah. And that's a great point. And that is the deadline. But along those lines, I do want to add, that's when you have to have it done. We strongly encourage getting it done in advance so that you're not rushing at the deadline and facing possible penalties from that.
Absolutely, which is my next question. So what are these penalties? What are the consequences for not being in compliance by June 30th?
Yeah, there is definitely consequences. So that is a $250 fine each day that you're not in compliance. So really annually, you're talking about over $90,000 in fines if you do not meet the compliance.
That's a hefty fine. $90,000, so a $250 daily recurring fine for high-rise condo associations.
Yeah.
Let's discuss compliance now, and let's stay with Daniel. Could you walk us through the steps that are required by a condo association to comply with the BE 305 initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first phase of this is really all about measuring and reporting. So the associations are going to be responsible to collect their energy and water usage data for all of the buildings. That includes, as I mentioned before, the units, the individual condo units, and any retail or commercial in there. So along those lines, this is also the data for the previous year. We're doing the benchmarking in 2023 for the 2022 data, obviously because you won't have the full year of 2023. That can be a big lift for a lot of teams to do on their own, which is why there are professionals such as the FirstService Energy team out here poised to help with that. Along that, once you've gathered that data, you have to have an Energy Star profile set up in the Energy Star portfolio manager. And then you have to enter the data. It's got to be certified by Energy Star manager, energy manager, or other energy professional. Really, you got to then submit it to the governing authority. That's to meet compliance. There are other things that are recommended, such as making sure, following up on that and making sure there were no clerical errors at the end of that. And so, as I mentioned, it really can be a lot to go into it, but there are systems and steps in place to really help with that process.
Daniel, you mentioned energy there, right? And that's a quick little easy word, but when you say that, what do you mean?
Yeah, so when we're talking about energy, the typical go-to is your electric and gas. Everybody thinks of electric and gas. But when we're talking about energy, we're really referring to an electric, gas, if you have oil, diesel for any backup generators in the building, any form of energy. Honestly, if you're using wood and burning some wood to power a building, don't recommend it. But if that's happening, it's got to be reported as well.
Wow, that's very interesting. So what I gather is that the base year is going to be 2022 for this reporting, for the benchmarking. And then once we gather the information from a building, then it's uploaded to the Energy Star website. So that's really what the program entails, at least this portion of the program.
Yeah.
So on that note, let's go to Kim. In terms of operations, Kim, what are some of the challenges that the BE 305 initiative has created in your condo buildings?
So thank you, Frank. A lot of the challenges is really the managers being able to have the time to gather all this data, because as Daniel said, it's not just the common area electric for the building or the common area cost, it's unit specific costs. So that is a big lift for our managers. A lot of them don't have access to that data. The generator fuel, as Daniel mentioned, quantifying all that, going through all the invoices. FirstService Energy does have the ability to help us with this for what I would consider a very nominal fee, which is $550, which is less than it would cost us for my associations to retain a certified energy manager, energy professional to even certify this data after the teams had gathered it. So I think it's definitely worth having FirstService Energy go through, pull this data mine all this for us, and be the Energy Star manager and upload this for our teams.
Absolutely. This sounds like a no-brainer. All great points. And I could see what you're saying about a heavy lift for property managers in these buildings, with everything they have to do on a daily basis, to also require them to keep information and start benchmarking energy and water consumption. That could be a great.
And Frank, a couple of things on that, right? So Kim, thank you for the recommendation. We appreciate that, and we do enjoy working with the properties that FirstService Residential manages. That being said, if a property chooses to work with another vendor, totally okay. But I do want to highlight that I think it's in the best interest of a property to work with a professional on this. You mentioned some of the time that would go into that. That's absolutely right. Also, and Daniel, feel free to hop in if you would like, but there's some specific experiential knowledge that goes into filling out these forms, and it can be a complicated, tedious task to go through and gather all the data and input the forms and upload the data, which just on a cost per hour basis, paying the manager, paying an assistant manager to do that really doesn't make sense financially for an association. Another caveat to that, Daniel had mentioned that every 5 years there has to be a retrocommissioning or a recommissioning study. Now, I don't want to focus on that now because that's 5 years from now, but part of that study every 5 years is to confirm the previous 5 years' data, right? So it's important that this is accurate. That way we're not getting hit with redoing work in 5 years. So I want to kind of highlight those points.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Chris. So you can, and it absolutely has been done in other markets, gather whatever data you have and put it in there and get it certified, and now you met compliance, right? But making sure that the data is accurate, it's just beneficial because you're not going to have any kind of issues with having to redo it. But two, the real purpose of this is to make sure you have an idea of what's going on with your building energy wise, so you can make informed decisions about what equipment you need to replace, end of life things like that, where you're going to need to make those decisions. In other markets, we see actual deadlines and requirements happening where you have to meet certain goals to reduce your carbon. That's not in Miami yet, but having this information and accurate information really allows you, the earlier you do it, it allows you to make those decisions about your equipment, and when you replace that equipment, what type of equipment you're going to put in, and what things you're going to be, what kind of projects and where you want to invest that time and effort.
Those are great points by Daniel and Chris. Let's get into the end goal of the BE 305 initiative. What is the purpose of this program at the end of the day? Chris, could you walk us through that?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. And to Daniel's point just there, I think he kind of teed that up very well, in that the point of this is to help properties save energy over the course of time, right? It's a piece of my tenure in the South region with First Service Residential that I'm very proud of, is how much energy and water we've been able to save properties while maintaining and improving the lifestyles of the residents who live in those properties, right? The properties and Kim's team and her peers have saved in total millions of dollars a year. And it's really a feather in my cap I'm very proud of, in our caps, excuse me. And that's the goal, right? To help properties save money. And there's a quote that's given to Peter Drucker, although I'm not sure that that's accurate, is that what gets measured gets managed, right? And water and energy consumption cost for condos in the city of Miami in the South region of Florida is about 30% of your budget. So if we're able to more effectively measure those expenses for a property, the property is going to save money. And it's a win-win, because then you're in compliance with this legislation, and you're also putting your best foot forward to residents who want to purchase a unit in your building. So at the end of the day, saving money and fighting climate change go hand in hand.
But more to your point, how does this reduction actually happen in detail? What process, what systems do you put into these buildings to actually reduce consumption?
Sure. Well, there's a kind of a general conversation that I'll kind of touch on, and then we can get into specifics a little bit. I don't want to bore everyone because I can nerd out about engineering pretty easily. So if we're benchmarking a property and that property has a really high energy consumption per square foot, which goes into the data that Daniel was saying is important to gather accurately, well, then we know this property is consuming more energy. Then we can start digging into why that is, right? Is there something different about this property? Do they have more amenities? Do they have more glass? Or are they running inefficiently? And that's something we want to tackle. So using that as a highlighter to compare and contrast to other neighbors in the city is important. But I think to the other part of your question, Frank, specifically as much as I love to think what I do is magic, and it's really not, right? There's no secret sauce other than knowing how a building should run. And the people on this webinar can guess where buildings in Miami consume their energy. It's water, cooling, and moving air and water around the building, right? So it's fans, HVAC, and lighting. Now, the specifics of how do we make sure that we're not getting swindled by snake oil salespeople, and how do we make informed decisions about that? That's where, you know, Kim and myself and Daniel and the rest of our team can help along the way.
Okay, excellent. So the first process would be to audit the building and see exactly where the inefficiencies lie, if there may be any. That makes a lot of sense. Let's go back to Kim on this question. How's First Service Residential assisting communities to help ensure that they comply with the requirements?
Thank you, Frank. So on our properties, we've done historically over the years with Chris and his team, energy audits. And we've looked at where we can potentially assist the associations in saving money and making them more efficient. One of the things is one of the items is variable frequency drives, which allows the equipment to run more efficiently and extends the life of the equipment and reduces energy costs. We've looked at lighting solutions throughout other buildings. We've looked at water consumption solutions throughout other buildings. So the fact that First Service, we've always offered the energy management services to our clients through First Service Energy. They do work with all the major utilities, the building's property managers to obtain the data. We actually have the data, and it's fairly simple for them to data mine the data and then put it into the format that they would need to complete the Energy Star and be compliant on the website. It's also taking a huge lift off the boards and the managers. Making sure the information is collected, confirmed, and really uploaded correctly is huge in this initiative, because as Daniel and Chris have alluded to, if it's not done correctly the first time, 5 years later, it's going to be a really heavy lift trying to go in and do all those corrections. But also to Chris's point, and Daniel's point, when associations have to make decisions long-term about equipment, for example, generators. I have some associations that are considering going from diesel to natural gas, right? So we can work with them to help them make those decisions.
Yeah, this could be a daunting task for self-managed buildings or associations that just don't have the necessary resources. Would you agree with that, Kim?
Absolutely. It's a very daunting task. The fact that we have, First Service has the resources that we have is a tremendous value to our clients, to our managers, to our regional directors, and to myself as well. Because this is absolutely a heavy lift, and the fact that we do have all the resources that we have is a tremendous asset.
Yeah, and along that line, in the collaborations that we've had, sorry to cut you off there, Frank, but the one of our goals is also, you know, to get it done, but also increasing that knowledge base of the teams that we're working with, right? And we do distribute, as we did at the start of this meeting, information to help with that. So it's not just getting it done, but helping our teams in that collaboration, everyone involved, know what's going on. So it's not just you know, hey, we got this kind of thing. There is that aspect of don't worry, we got it. But there's also the aspect of encouraging everyone to get up to speed on what's going on and be prepared for the future.
Yeah, no, there's no question that First Service Energy is a fantastic resource for our client associations. Let's go to Chris on the next question. What kind of background and experience does First Service Energy have with benchmarking?
Sure. And Daniel, feel free to hop in as if I screw any of this up, you might know some of this better than I do. Well, frankly, Daniel and his team with First Service Energy have been doing a phenomenal job throughout the country for years on this. This was a topic that has been happening in New York City for, I want to see, more than a decade. Like it's not a new thing. It's not a new item for cities across the country. Like I said, we're currently doing it in Illinois as well as DC, as well as other areas, Philly, some areas in Maryland, Boston. Really, most major metropolitan areas are going this way. In the South, Orlando and Atlanta as well. So, this is an item that is happening, and it's an item that we've got a lot of experience with throughout the country. And again, huge kudos and shout out to Daniel and the rest of the First Service Energy team that does this lift in the background, and really proud to have them as part of the team.
Thanks, Chris. That's great to work with you too. It's great working with all our teams. It's really part of the joy of doing it. But yeah, to Chris's point, this is not just isolated in a couple big cities. There's many cities across the board, major metropolises. It's not just cities. It's states, counties, and there are even on the West Coast places where there is a city, a county, and a state ordinance, all for benchmarking. So we're in basically anywhere where First Service Residential is at, we're helping out with that, and it's just growing. You see it every year. We keep our finger on the pulse of where it's going to be popping up too. So, and you can see that even in Miami with the increased or decreased minimum of benchmarking square footage, so for buildings, and so that's it's growing exponentially.
To your point, Daniel, right? This is not just the city of Miami. To the point that, so this was originally brought up in the South Florida area for Dade County, right? I was in the room where we were creating this legislation, and it's going a little slower for Dade County than the city of Miami kind of took the reins and decided that we're going to implement this a little bit quicker. So, yes, it's happening in the city of Miami now. But as the city of Miami goes, so does the rest of South Florida, and as we've all seen through other rules and legislation, even into the entire state of Florida, for things like the structural analysis and things like that. So, I think that it's going to be a topic that a lot more condominium associations are going to deal with.
Absolutely. So I know there's a lot of detail we discussed, and there are probably more than a few questions. I just want to remind our viewers that in the chat, we've also shared the miami.gov website for you to refer to. So with that, let's open it up to some questions. So the first question is, how does parking and EV charging stations impact this initiative? Chris or Daniel, can you start us off with this one?
Sure, I'll take it, and we can kind of go from there, right? So EV charging is a topic that has become very popular over the last year or two. It's been a thing that we've been helping properties manage and plan for 6 or 7 years, right? I remember, Kim, we had talked about this when you were down in Miami. Goodness gracious, 7-8 years ago.
Absolutely.
At a property that we managed down there, and so Frank, to answer your question, it's another consumption of energy that is going to be associated with that building, right? The energy consumption being an EV charger is just going to be something that is included in that FPL bill. Now, Daniel, you have a little bit more experience with me, specifically with the Energy Star website. Do you want to kind of talk about that and how that would apply? With the caveat that everything that you're going to say, that would be a thing that you and our team manage, right? This wouldn't be a curveball for anyone else to deal with.
No. And the EV is, and it really is depending on the market, but what we're seeing in New York is New guidelines. New York's been doing this for a while, new guidelines that it is reported overall. So that, as we mentioned earlier, commercial, it actually, I didn't mention this, but parking, any lighting for parking must be included in your overall consumption for the building, energy consumption. So EV would go into that. The caveat being in New York, regulations and renewed looks at this, they allow you to actually extract that. If you have that separately metered, if you can measure that EV, you can actually take that out. And so that's all happening, but at this point in time, you do have to include that in your total for the building.
Yeah, and that will just be a piece of your FPL bill. So
Yep.
us or whoever ends up managing this for your association, they'll take that into account. And as Daniel had alluded to, in other cities, this type of legislation evolves as we get further and deeper in there, right? So this year, if you happen to have 30 Teslas in your garage that get full charges every day, yeah, that may sway your energy consumption in your building a little bit. Which is to say, don't get too bogged down in the weeds
Right.
there. When a building's score comes back, and yes, you get a benchmarking score, kind of similar to if you go out to a restaurant in New York City, you'll get a health grade. There will be a health grade on the front of the building, right? This is up in the cloud, but it's the same type thing. So we can kind of start digging in and say, oh, this property has 18 level 2 chargers, and maybe those are swaying the consumption quite a bit.
Yeah, that's where it can definitely get fun to kind of nerd out on the data a bit. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, you can just grab the data that FPL gives you and say, here it is, and we're done with it. But to get an accurate idea of what's going on, if you got 30 EV chargers, you put that in there and you start putting that information. There's a whole plethora of other things that we can go into, but
yeah,
at another time.
We did get a question from Maria. She was asking if commercial buildings this applies to as well. The answer is yes. Basically, this applies to any building over 100,000 square feet, regardless of how it's used. Just plan on that. If we want to get into specifics later on, there are some tiny itty bitty loopholes that they won't apply to anyone on this call. But yes, it does apply to commercial buildings as well.
And more to that point, Chris, we're seeing especially in the city of Miami, we have a lot of mixed use buildings. The commercial condos in the ground level of these buildings or in whatever level they're located also count towards this?
Yeah, right. So at the end of the day, and Daniel can go into some of the specifics on how this interacts with the website, but the overarching concept, the building is a building, and unit 423, that's a condominium unit, a residential condo unit, and the Subway sandwich shop on the first floor, those both consume energy. And as far as the energy consumption being put into the website, it's the same. It's just an energy consumer, just like a residential condominium would be a Bank of America, a dry cleaners, or a legal office. There are some specifics there. Daniel, feel free to hop in on that if you want to, but I do want to highlight, at the end of the day, it's not going to change it for the building if it's 100% residential versus mixed use versus what.
And another thing to keep in mind, you're exactly right, Chris. Just the other thing that can get lost is a building or property, right? So if you have a heat source that's connected to two buildings, that becomes a single. You have to report both of those in for your benchmarking. So
excellent. Let's remind our viewers again, because we keep getting this question, and just in case anyone missed it, what is the deadline for associations to file and comply? Daniel, could you walk us through that?
Yeah. So to file and comply, June 30th, over 200,000 square feet. That is the initial, it's got to be done by that date. As I mentioned earlier, we like to have it done ahead of time so you can look for anomalies and audit it and make sure it's accurate.
Got it. So
yeah,
June 30th of this year for any building that's 200,000 square feet and above, which, like we said, it's most of the buildings in the city of Miami.
Yeah. And then as Chris mentioned, everybody over 100,000 square feet should be approaching this as it's this year because October 1st is the anyone over 100,000 square feet.
And I just gonna highlight that, right? So June 30th, in my mind, emotionally, sounds a lot like a long time from now. But that's only 5 months from now. And the amount of work that needs to be done is significant. So regardless of who a property decides to partner with on this initiative, and again, if you feel like you want to do it in-house, I really urge you to seek a professional, at least to pick their brain if it's not us, somebody else. But 5 months from now for the lift, we're getting to the point where we need to have properties start signing LOAs to work with vendors on this pretty quickly.
That's a great point. What about, we touched upon this earlier on, but how often does the information need to be updated? And who's going to be responsible for that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So ultimately, it's the property's responsibility to update this information annually by the deadline. So once a year, you have to have the information in Portfolio Manager and submitted by the deadline. That is just the quick and dirty of that.
Got it. Our next question, this is a very good question, is, and this is open to the panel, is FBNL assisting with any of this in terms of the BE 305 initiative?
Yeah, so we have a great working relationship with Florida Power and Light, and working with them throughout the process, develop this on the county level. They were in the room as well, and we have some wonderful information from them and some ability to help gathering information. They're helping us by supplying aggregated anonymous data, which is a huge lift, right? So we're not going to every unit owner and asking for their data. Effectively, that would make the legislation moot, as we've seen in a couple of other cities. So having that partnership with FPL is really how this is possible.
Excellent. Daniel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so that is the biggest lift, right? Is the FPL data, which is your electric. So there is the data gathering that needs to be done for your water and for your other fuel sources, right? And so that can be a little more intensive. So working with the vendors and having those outreaches does require a good amount of time. So that's something that we have those relationships with, as we've done with First Service Residential already has that set up. So
Excellent. Now, Kim, I'm very familiar with your portfolio properties, and I know they extend beyond the boundaries of the city of Miami. I know you have properties in Miami Beach, Sunny Isles, Aventura, et cetera. Is your staff aware of this initiative in those municipalities? And are they prepared, as your properties in the city of Miami, are they as prepared?
So thank you for that, Frank. So my entire team is aware of the BE 305 initiative. The other municipalities are likely to follow suit. Typically, South Florida is the leader in a lot of these initiatives. Specifically, this one was the city of Miami, but we do expect the other municipalities to follow suit on this. So my team is aware of it, and when their municipalities adopt this, we'll be prepared. We have our First Service Energy team behind us, and I think we'll follow the same process.
Excellent. That's great. That's great information. So this has been an excellent discussion on a topic that board members should be aware of. That's all the time we have for today. If there are any unanswered questions, we'll be sure to get someone from your local market to follow up with you. I would like to thank our panel of experts, Daniel, Chris, and Kim. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us here today. I would also like to thank our viewers. Thank you for watching. And until next time, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.